Okay, so obviously the last few weeks have just been unprecedented, bizarre, horrible, terrifying, hilarious, depending on the time of day. Obviously, for yourself, you're a street photographer, but you're also a head teacher. How are things going for you?
I think I'm one of those. I think in this situation, people are either absolutely stuck with nothing to do, so much time on their hands, or the other extreme, which is completely crazy, full-on madness, can't switch off. And I've been mostly like that for the last couple of weeks. So school's now been closed for 2 weeks. In fact, we had to close 2 days earlier than the others because we just didn't have enough staff or the capacity to continue. So we actually closed on the Wednesday, which was the day that Boris announced that schools were going to close on the Friday. We closed that day. Yeah. And it's been mad since, because I've been trying to organise online learning for kids, trying to support parents with that, trying to help the staff to make sure they've got everything that they need, trying to see how many staff are actually fit and well enough to come in, how many staff need some sort of protection or sheltering, how many kids we need to have back, because we had to open again. Well, we have opened again for kids of key workers and vulnerable children. And we've had to do that on a different site. So all of that has been just crazy, and then really not switching off at night. So some nights I've only sort of had 3 or 4 nights kip. Partly the, weird dreams of doing stupid things that were nothing to do with work, but were obviously all to do with work. One particularly weird one where I was shoveling sand into A4 folders and trying to sort out different grains of sand. And every time I went to sleep, I was doing the same thing again, just doing my head in. But it was all just about trying to get everything in the right place at school. So that's been crazy. As for photography, I take my camera with me everywhere, but I've hardly taken a single picture. It's the one time I would really love to be up in London shooting the quieter streets or people in masks or any of that. The things that we're going to look back on as being, I don't know, the image of the time. And I can't really justify doing it. I don't think anybody would really say it was essential, would they? A historian might.
Well, I think in America, they're still allowing people on press passes out. So you've got people that are like stand-up comedians that are still able to go out and do whatever they want, which is absolutely bizarre. Yeah, I suppose that's a key worker to some people.
Well, I suppose when you've got a stand-up comedian as a president, that's the way it goes, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the whole of American politics at the moment is kind of looking a little bit like a clown car, where just every person that gets out just seems to be yet another clown. Well,
mind you, people in glass houses.
Yeah, true. But how about yourself as a person? How are you doing?
I'm all right. I was looking forward to the Easter holidays, but it looks like we're not going to get those either because we've got to keep open. I'm pretty knackered, but I'm all right. Very sadly lost a good mate on Monday night to the virus. That's the first person I know. So that's kind of hit home quite hard. He's a really, really lovely guy. Shout out to Nick. Used to play guitar together and just a really lovely guy. So that's heartbreaking, and him and his family. But so far I'm safe and well, and family are safe and well, and so that's important. But I guess like most teachers, we've felt quite vulnerable because we are not perhaps quite in the front line as doctors and nurses are, but we are looking after the children of the doctors and nurses who are going in and dealing on the front line. So we're never quite sure what we're faced with each morning, what we're picking up. You can't say to a 7-year-old, keep your 2 meters. They're full of enthusiasm, want to run up and show you something, and you can't run off in the other direction. So you just have to kind of take that.
Yeah, I was actually saying, because my wife works in care, but not with NHS. And I think obviously the outpouring of support for the NHS is fantastic. It's amazing to see what is quite a thing people neglect quite often, in terms of, we just, when we want an ambulance, we phone and they turn up, and we don't ever seem to sort of thank the fact that's a constant. But I do think at the moment we are ignoring a lot of other people that are doing pretty amazing things. I actually put a message at the beginning of one of my podcasts, I think yesterday, talking about, teachers, care workers, non-NHS health staff, people that don't really have the choice, but are still doing stuff to help other people and putting other people before themselves. I think it's quite important we don't put too fine of a label on who's actually helping us get through this, because there's a lot of different hands helping to move things along, when really people could be as selfish as most people seem to be, and the whole system would come to a halt.
Yeah, I think that's very true, but I wouldn't want to swap places with a doctor or nurse at the moment. To be honest, I'd find it really hard looking at that every day. And if I can do my bit to help from a distance or at arm's length or with their kiddies, then that's great. But you're right. I think go back 3, 4, 5 weeks, and who were the important people in society, and you looked at the celebrities, and actually they're the last people we need at the moment.
Yeah, it's been quite funny. The backlash has been nice against some celebrities who have tried to kind of turn what is a lot of people in a very bad situation into can you pay attention to me, and that's kind of backfired in a big way, and I'm kind of glad to see that. Yeah,
I mean, look at your £1 million a week footballer. I mean, he's done nothing for 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah,
and the important ones are the ones on the NHS who are saving lives, and let's not go down the whole amount of pay conversation, but I just hope that at the other side of all of this, something positive comes out for people like the NHS.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to think as well that the sort of public opinion being more positive would carry on for more than just a couple of weeks after things get back to normal, that we can continue with that support.
Yeah.
You mentioned about wanting to be out and sort of photographing and documenting things.
Yeah.
I actually started when we were in Washington, and it started to sort of leak through that things were turning. And I photographed a few of like the news outlets that were showing the news from China. And then it carried on in New York. And I got a few pictures in New York of people starting to show signs of their concern about it. And then I just dropped it. I just didn't sort of follow through on that. And I'm now absolutely kicking myself. It's definitely a time that we need some documentarians out there photographing it from a non-biased perspective.
I think so. And it's the time when I'm so envious of those, envious on the one hand, those street photographers who are living right in the heart of London and have to walk the streets on their journey to work, or to pop out and get their essentials, but living as I do, sort of a 50-minute train hop from the city. I can't justify going in, and I'm looking out of my front window now, and it's a bush and a quiet country street. There's not much going on, So that's frustrating, but let's keep things in perspective. I'd love to be out there taking photos, but there are people in far worse positions than I'm in.
Absolutely. As far as obviously, I don't want to call it downtime, because for someone like me, being a completely useless member of society, I haven't got a lot going on right now. Whereas obviously you're running a fairly big ship on your end. If you do manage to get any downtime, is there anything that you haven't been able to do, or what are you doing to take your mind off of things?
I was having a conversation with myself the other day about, what would be the things you'd sit and do if somebody gave you 3 months, which to some extent is what's happened. And I've now got a horrible feeling that I might get to the end of 3 months and not have done any of them.
Right.
But there are things that I've sort of mentally made a list of, which are mostly photographically based. I mean, photography without a shadow of doubt is my release. It's my work-life balance. It's where I go when I need to not be at work. And so my options are mostly going to be tinkering with images. I've still got stuff that I can go back and edit. I've actually got a folder of photos I took in London about a month ago. I went up to the exhibition that Mo Barziger had organised, the 6 street photographers, and I went up there, met some of them. Some of them I knew, but met some of the others, and that was a really good day. And I've got some images that I shot around town that day, sitting in a folder. But they're the last photos that I've got of any proper photo walk that I did. And I'm almost loath to start editing them, because once I've done that, I've got nothing else.
You want to ration them?
Yeah, almost. I perhaps ought to do one every other day or something. But I haven't even looked at them. I do tend to try and leave my images for as long as possible so that I get a proper objective look when I come back to them. But I haven't even looked at what I've got. But also, I suppose, I know that when I go through the photos I've taken, I reject quite a few, or I put them in a sort of an A list with the images I'll do fairly quickly and, stick them on Instagram and so on. But then the B, C, D, or even further list tend to get left aside. And there's, there won't be so much, but it might be worth looking back through some of those B list photos and seeing if there's anything that I can make into something half decent. I've never actually got around to setting up an online gallery as in a place to buy prints on my website. And I'm always beating myself up for that because people do contact me for prints, but and then I always give some kind of one-off answer, and 9 times out of 10 it comes to nothing because I'm not organised enough. So 3 months would be good for sorting that out, whether I will or not. Putting some of them in a book, maybe doing something with somebody like Blurb. Plenty of people seem to be doing that, and I think a book, although they're fairly expensive, if you were selling a book for sort of 25 to 40 quid, it's quite a big ask of someone to spend that on your pictures, but it does compare very favourably with selling a print for the same price. So maybe get some sort of book together or a zine of some sort. If I was purely having the time to concentrate on my photos, I would probably get that organised. But the one thing I have done actually, which I'd never given myself time to do before, was to switch the camera to the video setting and have a play with that. And I have made a couple of videos for work, nothing particularly artistic, in fact, nothing artistic at all, but it's got me onto the video button. And what I really wanted to do was reach out to the kids from school, because although I haven't seen them for 2 weeks, that doesn't feel very long to me, but 2 weeks in a 7-year-old's mind will be a very long time. So I wanted to put a couple of things out for them so that they could see on YouTube. And actually, what's really nice is that there are now 2 or 3 of us on the staff who've been doing the same thing, reading stories or doing assemblies or putting some maths things up. So I've at least learned how to use the video button and even a little bit of editing, which has been good.
You'll be vlogging in no time.
I haven't got enough to say.
No, neither do vloggers generally.
We'll see.
If you take out the 15 minutes of adverts that you usually squeeze in and then the waffle, that's all you really get normally. One thing I do want to ask you is concerning sort of when things do, hopefully go back to normal and things start to kind of return to a sort of sense of normality. People are back out in the streets and whatnot. And then you get your weekends back, your life starts to sort of calm down. Are you going to view street photography in a different way following on from all of this? Are you going to see sort of wanting to kind of make more of the sort of news narrative of what's going on? Or are you looking forward to kind of just getting back and just photographing?
I think I'll have missed the news narrative by the time it all gets back to normal, unfortunately. I'm just looking forward to getting back to photographing. I mean, I think my photography is less documentary and more sort of humanistic, really. I'm not very good at projects or groups of, series of photos that all tie together. I've tried, but I haven't tried that hard. The problem is I've never really settled on anything that I want to pursue. So when I go out and shoot, I never know what I'm going to come back with. It's like sticking your rod in the river and not knowing whether you're going to get a trout or a salmon or a shopping trolley. I never know what I'm going to get, and I don't even know whether. I think they were all fish apart from the trolley, but I don't know whether you'd find them all in a river. But you know what I mean. I go out into the street and I really have no idea often where I'm going to go, let alone what I'm going to come back with. So I'm not very good at doing that whole series of things. I've tried. I tried to shoot a series about before a football match. I've tried to film marches and demonstrations and things like the Chinese New Year in Soho, and they always come out as better as individual photos and one-off moments than things that are actually about the event. So, no, I think I'm probably destined to be more of a humanistic photographer who just catches odd idiosyncratic moments about people.
With this returning to normal, what would be the first place that you would want to head to?
Well, in terms of practicalities, it's going to be London, and I'd love to say Paris or New York or Chicago or south of France, all of which are places I've either always wanted to shoot in or love shooting in. I think realistically, just the idea of being able to get on the train and get off in London in less than an hour's time, and I would probably want to do what I always want to do, which is walk up into Soho and wander around there. I just always seem to strike lucky around there. There are so many interesting characters. It doesn't make any difference whether it's fairly early in the morning when the streets are quieter, the busy afternoon, or the evenings when you've got all the neon lights and things. There are always so many different things to look at and shoot, and it's always changing. It's always changing. So probably there, but I love the South Bank too, and parts of the city, and I'm kind of desperately keen to get to Canary Wharf because I've only ever really shot there a couple of times, and there's some fantastic architecture there, and fewer people. So the idea of just one or two people with a fantastic architectural backdrop is something I want to go and do a little bit more geometry in my photography than perhaps I have been before.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've seen some amazing work from Canary Wharf. It's a place I've not really been to not since I've known, my way around the camera. And it's something that I'm a big fan of. I'm a big fan of I think his name's Jeffrey Karp and a few others who I'm a big fan of any photographer really that works on the basis of geometry when it comes to architecture and hard light, because it's something I struggle with so much. It's I find maybe I'm a little bit the opposite of what you normally see from people, where they follow things that they're strong at and they follow people that are, better versions of what they want to be doing. Whereas I tend to always find myself fascinated by the things that I have just no skill at doing at all. What I definitely wanted to ask you, and I don't think we touched on too much the last time I spoke to you, and something that I think is really going to be helpful to a lot of people that are sort of stuck with wanting to use this time productively, is your inspirations, your favorite photographers, things like that. Do you have any recommendations on who people should be checking out photographically at the moment?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, I've got so many photo books. In fact, my wife and daughter both banned me from having any more when it was my last birthday and the last Christmas. They said, what do you want, but it can't be a photo book kind of conversation. Which,
was that your go-to present?
Always, yeah. I can't get enough of them really, because they're all, so much inspiration from so many different people, and I can't think of a better way to chill out than sit down with a beer or a cup of tea or a whiskey or whatever it is for 10 minutes and just go through a book. So yeah, I mean, many and varied. I think one of the key moments for me actually was an exhibition in Paris about 5 or 6 years ago of Cartier-Bresson, and I hadn't really been taking photos very long, and I hadn't particularly settled on street photography as where I was going to find my voice. But the exhibition was amazing, and I know it's obvious to cite him as a reference because he's the godfather or the grandfather or just God or what, I don't know. But he, just incredible photos, and always going through his work is stunning. I suppose black and white work. Again, not a street photographer, but I love the processing that Salgado does, Sebastião Salgado, the deep blacks and just stunning images. And I think I try and emulate that a little bit in some of my street work, because I do like the very heavy contrast deep blacks I want my blacks to be black rather than grey or, off-white. Sergio Lorraine, I mean, I know I'm going more with some of the voices from the past here, but Sergio Lorraine, the Valparaiso book, and Don McCullum, obviously, for those very dark. I think I do like my art to be a little bit dark, really. And the Don McCullum exhibition last year at the Tate was just staggering. And even looking at, he's renowned for his wall photography and the pictures he shot in London in the early 60s. But when you look at his landscapes, even his rural scenes look like battlefields. Just stunning. So a lot of black and white stuff, but I don't know. I think one of the things I've never really felt is that I don't have a particular style. I guess I'm still trying to find that, and there are lots of I try lots of different things. Some of it geometric, some of it more, just an observation of a human trait or a coincidence or something. I perhaps try and do too many different things, but I think that's mirrored in the people I enjoy looking at. So, I love Saul Leiter for his use of colour and his abstract eye, and I know that he's such a touchstone for people these days. You've only got to go through Instagram, and you very quickly find people who are heavily influenced by him and his use of colour. But all, with very good reason. And similarly, I guess people like Ernst Haas, Harry Greer, Fred Herzog, just beautiful use of colour.
If it's all right to just ask you, why you would go with photo books over just sort of viewing stuff online? What is it about photo books that you prefer?
Oh, good question. I don't think you can beat actually having and holding something that's paper in front of you. It's very different looking at a print on paper to looking at it online, and so many different papers as well. I think texture of the paper, the color of the paper. When you're looking at it in a book, you're looking at the pictures in the order that the photographer wants you to look at them. It's the difference between having an LP and playing it in track order as opposed to, I don't know, playing the odd track on Spotify. You've got them in the order that the artist intended. Yeah.
It's more of a body of work, and you're kind of taking it as a body of work as opposed to just taking one image, consuming it, and then moving on straight away.
Yeah, and it's got its own time to it. I think we're really good with Instagram or viewing photos online at just flicking your thumb every second kind of thing, and things just scroll through. Whereas with a larger image that you've got on a book, you take a much more considered approach, and I think you notice a lot more. And it's larger, obviously. Well, actually, maybe perhaps not than a computer screen, but I think most people are now viewing online images on their phones or iPads. So
absolutely,
there's just something really nice about having the book and holding it.
One of the other things about the book as well for me is the fact that if you're looking at something on a device, you can be interrupted at any moment by a notification or a phone call or a text message or whatever. Whereas with a book, you can literally just switch off, focus your attention on one thing. I don't think it's maybe the best thing in the world. And I can see down the line there being a pretty big deal about this, especially with younger people. And this might be something that you can probably comment on much better than I can. But I do think we're going to come to a point where it's like we're just putting too much information in front of our eyes too much over the course of a day, and it's just too much for the brain to take. It's going to have a negative effect eventually.
Yeah, it could well be. I mean, I think, children have notoriously short attention spans anyway. I mean, I know as teachers, it's very easy to spend far longer preparing something for a child to do than they actually spend doing it. And I think, actually having that book and being forced to go at the pace that it takes you to turn a page and properly look at something is a really important point.
Yeah, it's just, I think as well, as much as taking the time to view something, it's also about taking the time to only do one thing. We're never really doing one thing anymore. When I'm editing photos, I've either got like a film on or I've got something else on in the background. When I'm...
You've got a film on while you're doing it. I couldn't do that.
Oh yeah, no, I'm
Music,
absolutely horrendous.
yeah,
I watch whole documentaries. I watch anything while I'm editing because it's just... I think I'm part of this generation that has just not been able to switch off from media because we've had too much of it at our fingertips too early.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I've always got music playing. In fact, I had to turn it off to talk to you because I knew you'd be complaining about whatever was in the background. But I've always got music playing. And often when I'm working at work, when I'm working at school, I've got music playing as well. But definitely for editing photos. And when
it comes to editing, then what are you listening to?
Oh, anything. Six music or a lot of jazz. I think I said before, I've got a trumpet playing background, and so I listen to a lot of jazz, but a lot of very, very recent. There's an awful lot of really good jazz happening at the moment, especially in the UK. So, I don't necessarily listen to stuff with words when I'm editing, but it doesn't matter. I'll actually just listen to just about anything. What I don't like is quiet. The only time I
Right.
really do like quiet is when I'm shooting. So I've got a playlist of tracks that I listen to when I'm going to shoot, when I'm on the
Mhm.
train and getting ready. But as soon as I get to the station, when the train pulls into Waterloo, the headphones come out and music goes off, and I want to be absolutely present in that moment and shooting without any other distractions like the music. But I think it's good to get you in a frame of mind and a mindset for what you're going to do.
Oh, definitely. I think for me, when it comes to editing, I am, especially when it comes to weddings, I've got such a system down of how I go about things and the order in which I do things that I'm maybe working almost subconsciously, and I need something to distract me. Otherwise, I will just not get through the work. I think it's maybe not the healthiest thing, but it's definitely the way that I work. When it comes to shooting, though, I usually want some form of music, but I'm so pathetically amateur when it comes to street work. I can definitely see why you would want to be able to like switch into what's going on around you, be able to understand sort of the mood of what's around you, and maybe see stuff coming through having your other senses open as opposed to just constantly trying to look for the next photo.
Yeah, I think it is definitely that. It's about having a real awareness, totally immersing yourself in where you are, because you never know what's coming, and you want to be totally attuned to it. I guess it's a bit like, the same reason you don't really go cycling with massive headphones on, because you want to know there's a car behind you or whatever. I want to know that there's some big bloke with a briefcase running down the road to catch the train, the taxi, and he's coming up behind me. I want to be able to turn around and catch him, or if there's I don't know, a couple having an argument or whatever, I want to be fully aware of it before it suddenly has overtaken me and I've missed it. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Go back to Cartier-Bresson. There's some really good clips on YouTube of him shooting on the street, and he looks like he's doing some sort of strange ballet. He's so it's like a dance watching him move about and darting in and out of people. And I don't think I could. I don't think he could have been like that if he'd been listening to music. He wouldn't really have been tuned in properly to the environment he was shooting in.
I think my love of music when I'm shooting comes primarily from working with models and actors, and quite often it's a good way of, especially with the younger generation, I think that silence terrifies them. So when you have a conversation and there's even the remotest break, but they can't just escape to their phone, that tends to create more awkwardness than anything else. While I'm
or is it about creating a mood?
Yes, yeah, for definite. It's just about kind of. I think it's probably similar to the music you listen to when you're on your way to shoot. It's just about building up that energy and building up that excitement and building up the almost like the anticipation or the mood that you want for the shoot.
There's a level of aggression. There's a level of aggression in the music I listen to when I'm going up to shoot, and it's almost like I'm stealing myself. I don't really have too much problem with getting up close to somebody and taking their photograph, and I've definitely got better at it over the years. And I know that for some people it is a real issue, and I'm not talking about sticking a flash in someone's face and catching their reaction. I want my images to be close but candid and subtle, and ideally I don't want people to really I don't want my actions to impact upon somebody, but at the same time I do recognize that when going out to take a photograph, you do need to have a certain amount of courage, and sometimes the music helps just to put you in that mindset, in that frame, that mood to get out and be bold and be brave and get the shot.
Absolutely. I actually want to talk to you a little bit because it's something that's come up in a couple of conversations I've had recently about like the unwritten rules of street photography. And there are certain things you have to follow to fit within what can be considered street photography. Just your opinion on, you have to use certain focal lengths, or you have to shoot under certain settings or certain conditions, and it has to be in certain locations and so on. Nothing can be perhaps set up or posed or anything like that. I just want to know your sort of feelings on the unwritten rules of street photography.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, there's so many people would say, well, rules are meant to be broken. And I think that's true. But I think it's perhaps more about having a personal code than actual rules. So things like, I I would struggle to photograph somebody who was begging, because I think I wouldn't want to take a picture of, if it was the other way around, would I want that picture to be taken? Would I want someone to photograph me at my lowest point? No, I wouldn't. But I do think if you are absolutely, if there's an absolutely perfect moment that involves somebody like that, then I think you at least owe them something, and you should be buying them a coffee and having a chat, and actually very often, most times they want a conversation more than they want the money.
Absolutely.
So I think it's I try and avoid taking photos of people in that situation. I have once or twice, but they've been particular characters who've really been asking for it and wanting it and playing along with it, if you like. In terms of things like focal length, I think it's really a matter of choice. I've going back to Cartier-Bresson, he always shot 35 millimeter lens, full frame equivalent, sort of the 23 on the Fuji, and I have to say that probably is my favorite lens, because it's how the eye sees things, and pretty much it's just the lens I know best, and you can get a wide range of I'm not putting this very well. You can get up close to people and still fill the frame with a lot of the street.
Yeah, I find when I'm doing weddings, I'm a big fan of the 35mm, because essentially it gives you the opportunity to show scene and detail at the same time. You can move in, you can get punch-ins that look flattering. They look like what people expect to see by eye, but you can also get the wider shots. It's just a fantastic narrative lens. I've always said to people, if you want to learn photography, seriously, if you want to educate yourself on your own style, educate yourself on how your eye works and everything like that, 35mm, don't let yourself change lenses, and everything you photograph it as if it's part of a story. So you're trying to convey that story to the next person. And I think no matter what you want to end up doing, that's the way to learn photography.
Absolutely. And I think that's why that lens is so favored by street photographers. I think also it's a very honest lens, because you can't hide with it. That I wouldn't be happy as a street photographer to put a 400 millimeter lens on my camera, stand the other side of Piccadilly Circus, and photograph an intimate conversation between two lovers. Whereas if you're going to take the photo of your two lovers, then at least have the decency to get up close and be upfront about it. And if they say, well, you delete it, then you delete it. But if they give you a big smile and a big thumbs up afterwards, then all well and good.
But I think also, but would you not say that something like a 400mm lens, in the image, you'll be able to tell that's someone who's detached from the scene? Even if you're not educated as a photographer, you can tell that that's someone who's separated from the scene.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, aside from how heavy it is and the problems you've got of having to lug that around all day if you're working on the street, the 23mm lens is nice and small, compact, goes in your pocket. 400mm lens it's like having another arm, isn't it? Stuck on the end of the camera. It's massive. But yeah, I think you can tell, and there are people who make longer, telezoom lenses work really well. So someone like Phil Penman in New York, I don't know whether you know him.
Yeah. Love his work.
Yeah, brilliant. I met Phil at the Art on a Postcard exhibition last July. No, was it July?
Yeah.
Whatever it was, can't remember what it was. Really interesting guy. But if you look at his work, he's got some fantastic shots down sort of Madison Avenue, with a long focal length, but he's picked out a silhouette of somebody with an umbrella, and then from the image that he's using a long focal length, but he's isolated somebody, silhouetted them against the road, and then you've got the street lights going down beyond. And fantastic, and that's still street photography, and it's honest street photography. But when I think the difference is he's not trying to get a sneaky shot of somebody and hasn't got the courage to get close. He will do that, and he will use shorter focal lengths as I would. So yeah, I mean,
it's kind of like he's using the focal length to benefit the photo, not benefit the photographer.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, and I shoot mostly with a 23, but I am more and more beginning to take out a longer focal length, but probably not around Soho. I could see somewhere like on the South Bank or around more London or Canary Wharf, that sort of area where you've got a lot of architecture, geometry, figuring, then a longer focal length would actually be really, really good fun to use, but they would be very different street shots. They're going to be more geometric. So that's one of the rules kind of thrown out the window, I guess. I don't know, other things like you should only shoot black and white, or you should only shoot color, or the history of street photography is black and white, but that's because the history of photography was black and white until color film really became accepted in the 60s and later. But there are a lot of people who shoot one or the other, and I don't necessarily decide at the time. And I have both on my feed, which I think I've talked about before, and I'm quite happy with. So maybe that's one of the other rules debunked.
It's what's bizarre about the situation, though, is obviously I photograph weddings and portraits really commonly, and the street photography, until I just decided, it's literally the most ironic thing in the world that I would decide to get into street photography and then end up in a lockdown 3 months later.
Brilliant timing.
Yeah, I've just got the timing so perfectly down. But I don't find with wedding photography there's a tremendous amount of other photographers. There's other photographers that will tell you how to do something, but there's no unwritten rules. And with portrait photography, there's not really unwritten rules that are kind of like policed by other photographers, especially in like online communities. Street photography seems to be fairly on its own in that way. It's fairly unique in the sense that it does seem to be something that's, I see constantly Instagram accounts with comments left on really good photos where they're not conforming to what someone else's idea of what a street photo should be. It's just a very bizarre situation.
I know, and I think everybody has their own rules, and you've only got to look at online forums of street photography to see people who've posted a picture which is, I don't know, 4 people walking down the street going shopping, and other people saying, well, that's just 4 people walking down the street going shopping, it's not street photography. And I think that, you have to me, it's about finding something beautiful in the mundane. It's not just taking 4 people, the photograph of 4 people walking down the street going shopping. It's the fact that they've absolutely got their feet in stride together and they're all carrying a red bag and they've each got a yellow umbrella or whatever it is. It's not, it absolutely isn't just 4 people walking down the street going shopping. Otherwise, if it is, don't take the photo. But you've got to it's about finding something really beautiful.
I found this with cynical people. I found a lot with cynical people, especially when you try and introduce them to a new piece of art or a new movie or a new photographer or anything like that. There are cynical people that they think that the argument is if they can break what you're showing them down into a single sentence, then it's not complex enough to be considered good. But if you take even the most ridiculously famous, sought after, praised piece of art in history, you can break it down into a single sentence. It's not a valid argument for why something is or isn't good. And to me, surely it should just be a case of if something doesn't speak to you, then it's not for you and you move on and you look for something that brings you happiness rather than dwell on something that pisses you off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the rules are designed to keep people out, aren't they? They're about being exclusive rather than inclusive. Having said that, you can't just take a photograph of anything on the street and say, well, that's street photography. There has to be something in it which is a moment or a coincidence or whatever it might be. I think there are 2 other rules on street photography that I would really want to talk about, and one is around cropping or not cropping images. To me, I don't give a stuff whether somebody's cropped an image. If you're shooting with a 23 millimeter focal length and you've got, I don't know, 25 megapixels on your camera and what have you, you can afford to crop in a bit just to really emphasize the part of the picture that you weren't able to get close enough to because you didn't have a zoom lens. So, I don't have a problem with that. I know some people do, and I've been on a street photography workshop with a well-known street photographer who was saying, absolutely, you get it right in camera. You do not crop. Cartier-Bresson never cropped and all of this sort of stuff. But plenty of great photographers did. Ansel Adams, not that he was a street photographer, but did loads of work in the studio on his images. And to me, that's not an issue. You know, I will crop because I couldn't get close enough at the time, because if I'd waited till I'd run across the street, the moment would have gone. So I'll crop if I need to. I suppose the one rule that I do set myself is that all my images are candid. I never, ever, ever stop somebody and say, please, can I take your photo? Because that, I suppose is that breaking the fourth wall or something like that. But to me, it's a not a rule, but it's a code that I go by, because as soon as I've interfered in that image, it's lost its magic. You know, it's like you hear about those ancient tribes that believed the camera would steal their soul.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like that. You definitely lose something the moment somebody says, yeah, sure, and gives you their cheesiest grin. I did the day I really blew it was I was taking a friend out and showing him how to use his camera, and we came across this group of Hell's Angels who were doing a Santa run. It was December, and these guys were just outside Portsmouth, and they were doing some big charity run. They were all Hell's Angels, and they were biker gangs, and they parked up in this lay-by, and we saw them and pulled over and thought, well, let's just, I'm going to bumble about in here with my camera, and I'm going to shoot from the hip, and they're not going to notice. And we were both smaller than any of them, and they were quite intimidating, huge beards and tattoos and fast bikes and what have you. But they were actually really clearly a really lovely group of people. And got talking to one of them, and he was saying, what are you two doing? We're saying, oh, well, we're teachers, but we're just taking some photos. And they were saying, well, we're doing this charity run to raise some money for the local schools. So there was a good connection there. And I said to this guy, can I take your picture? And he was called Basher or Bruiser or something, sort of comically hilarious. And he got it on his leather jerkin. And I said, yeah, can I take your photo? And he gave me this kind of huge smile that would have melted any mother's heart. And it just didn't work. It just looked completely rubbish. He was sitting on his effing great Harley with this stupid, really sort of 9-year-old grin. And the whole thing just didn't work. I mean, it blew the cliche out of the water for sure, but it was a dreadful picture. And I just thought, I should really have just sort of crept about, got a few candid images of this. I mean, there was enough irony and juxtaposition in there anyway, with these Hell's Angels dressed as Santa.
Well, it's kind of where photojournalism and street photography meets. I think the one rule, I'm with you here, and the one rule I absolutely agree with is it should be documented, not imposed upon. You shouldn't be kind of forcing your will on the situation to document it. I think that's where photojournalism and street photography really line up. And there is a real, I think even outside of the photographic community, there's obviously a real dislike for anything that's journalistic that has been forced. So street photography kind of follows that, but that's not strictly a street photography thing. I think that's just generally a well thought out idea that something that's supposed to document something happening shouldn't be forced.
Yeah. The only thing I will do, it's not about getting a non-candid image, but sometimes if I see somebody coming towards me, I will position myself in such a way that they have to adjust their movement slightly, right? So that I will get a particular angle, or I will, I will get a particular shot that I'm envisaging. If I can influence that slightly, but without them realizing I'm taking the photograph, it might be that I'm forcing two people to come closer together, or move further apart, or get to one side of me, or move closer to a lamppost or a red car or whatever it might be. I will influence that slightly on occasions, but not very often. But I certainly wouldn't be talking to somebody. I wouldn't be posing somebody or any of those things. No, it has to remain candid. And if they say to you afterwards, did you take my photograph? What were you doing? Then I'm quite happy to say, yeah, I did. I thought you looked great, or that's a fantastic hat, or, really funny, your shoes match the same as that car, and I just saw that moment. And if they want me to delete it, I'll delete it. But they very rarely do. And most people don't actually believe you've taken their picture.
I've only ever seen one instance of it going sort of badly wrong in person. And I was at Borough Market because I'd been told Borough Market was kind of a great place to go. and get sort of candid street stuff, because there's a lot of interaction. There's a narrative that you can kind of fill in, and
you can hardly move.
Yeah, that's definitely something I learned, and I'm pretty big on personal space, so that was terrifying. But I saw one gentleman who was about 6'8", maybe taller, who just stood where there was a market stall selling cheese, I think it was, and he just stood and blasted and blasted and blasted and blasted. And in the end, the guy walked over and was like, "Can you piss off?" Because it's just, to that point, it's just being so disrespectful to the people that are there, and you're treating them almost like they're an object. You're treating them like they don't have a right to feel comfortable just being out in public.
Yeah, and actually that's when street photography actually breaks not just rules but laws, because that then becomes intimidation, and that's one thing you can't do. And that gives all photographers a bad name. So I never want to see that. Similarly, I never shoot more than a single frame. I never do the 20 frames a second thing. I don't do that, because there just seems something kind of artless about it, or lacking in skill. If you might as well be filming a whole movie and just take separate scenes out of it if you're going to do that. So sometimes I might have to move my finger fairly quickly on the shutter, but I wouldn't do the sort of that 11 frames a second or whatever it is your camera can do.
And then finally, before we let you go, just wanted to ask about what you thought, or just any thoughts at all on the couple of new Fujis that have come out since we last spoke. I know that the X100V's come out, and also the XT4. What are your opinions on those?
Well, I haven't touched either of them, and I'm sitting looking at my X100F and my XT3, and I'm very happy with them. And my X100F is kind of bashed and scratched and what have you, and it's my everyday go-to camera. It goes in my jacket, it goes in my bag when I go to work. In fact, I was even taking photos with it when I was walking into work this morning. It may be something that would be really nice. I know the V's got a flip-down screen, hasn't it? So I think that is always quite useful. The XT4 over the XT3, I don't know enough about it, but I think it's probably a lot. If you're a videographer, it's probably worth the upgrade. If you're just me, it probably isn't.
That's what I thought. I thought it was basically a video upgrade.
I think so. I mean, I think there are some improvements on autofocus, and maybe those will come down with a firmware upgrade for the XT3 in time. I think there's a couple of, you've got the classic neg film simulation in there as well, I think, haven't you, on the XT4? Yeah. But no, I mean, the XT3 and the X100F are both great. And if you were offering to buy me both of them as a thank you, Kris, that would be great. But
I'll see what I can do. How about that?
That would be wonderful. But I'm not going to be rushing out or saving my pennies. Although I could say to my wife and daughter for the next birthday, rather than the photo books, how about one of these?
Instead of 37 photo books, can you just get me one of these?
Yeah, maybe 370 photo books and get me one of these. Yeah.
Well, I was trying to put a careful spin on it, but yeah, that's pretty much about right.
Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you so much for doing this call. Obviously, between all of what you've got going on and the amazing things that you're doing, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Obviously, I hope this is all over as quick as possible so that you get the chance to kind of relax and maybe get something close to a normal sleeping pattern and some reality back in your life.
Thank you, my friend. It would be good to get out and do some shots together when all this is over.
Yes, absolutely. As soon as we are actually allowed to leave our houses, I'd love to come and see how real street photography is done.
And I promise not to bring my trumpet.
I always make sure we do this at the end of the episode. Where can everyone find your work? Okay,
brilliant. So I'm at Huey Raw on Instagram, HUEYRAW, or at Hugh Rawson, HUGHRAWSON on Twitter. And my website is www.hughrawson.com.
Amazing. And I do genuinely want to say to you and everyone else that is currently working so hard to get us through this difficult time, thank you so much for everything that you're doing.
Much appreciated. Cheers, Kris.
There was a time when I was lonely. Yeah, nothing's gonna hold us down, 'cause we are taking